So we said it after, in the midst of COVID and everybody went remote. What company in their right mind would continue to pay millions and millions of dollars for office space when their workers can work from home and workers want to work from home? Those are great questions. Is it the future of the workplace? Well, I don't think so, because, a lot of people say we suffer when we aren't in the office. And some folks at Bethel University have looked into that very topic, which is why we bring in Peggy, Kendall. She's professor of communication studies at Bethel University. She joins us on the John Schuster Coldwell Banker Hotline. So let me ask you this, Peggy: is remote work, is it hurting many companies?
Well, thank you for having me today. Is it hurting most companies? I have seen companies where people who are on a virtual team are the most excited, most cohesive, most high-performing teams that I've ever seen. But I've also seen lots of organizations that struggle with having virtual teams, virtual workplaces, that don't know how to manage people when they can't see them, because there's a lot of differences, and it takes more time, and you need to be a lot more intentional.
Okay, so do we have a consensus on, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Should we working more toward remote and just getting better at it? Is it, sometimes we're not good at working remote because this is a new thing. It just started a few years ago.
Oh, I know. And it really changed during COVID too. People's attitudes towards remote workers really, it really changed, because instead of not really trusting those people, we found out that when you work remotely, sometimes you can be way more productive, have a much better life-work balance. So you can make it work. I do think a lot of the research is suggesting that hybrid is probably kind of a good solution to this. But I'll tell you what, when we did our research project, some of the most high-performing people that we talked with, they said straight up, I am not going back to the office. I can get a job anywhere, and I don't need to go into the office, and this is where I fit the best, and this is where I'm most productive. And sometimes I think that's true for some people, but I don't know that it's true for everybody.
What made you explain the specific part of your research that you did at Bethel, what you were looking at, and I guess what triggered you to dive into this specific topic about remote learning?
Well, we got the scholarship from Bethel where a faculty and a student worked together on a research project. And I had done some consulting with online organizations. And I noticed a couple of them that really did a good job, but so many of them struggled. And so I thought, well, why not take a look at what's the difference? Why are these certain organizations so much better? So what we did is we did Zoom interviews with a lot of people that worked remotely, and just got their feedback on what works, what doesn't, what do you want to tell your manager? And we ended up focusing on something called psychological safety. And that really makes a difference between a high-performing team and a team where people are just really isolated and not really excited to be there. And basically, psychological safety, it says something like, if I screw up, or if I have a question, or I want to push back an idea, sometimes it's like I don't even want to say anything because I don't even know if people like me. So that's not like a good thing to have in a virtual environment. So we looked to see what kinds of things would improve psychological safety in virtual teams.
Is that because if you're in person, if you're actually face-to-face with someone, you get a better sense of, I guess, how you can, because I think I see where you're going with this, because, it happens all the time where, you talk to somebody face-to-face, it's easier to gauge how they feel and how you feel, as opposed to you send an email or you send a text, you can't gauge that. Is it the same way when we do work virtually?
That's so true, because when we're face-to-face, I can see from your nonverbals, what you're really thinking about me, or what you think about what I just said, or there's so many things we never use our words to explain. And then when you're virtual, all of that disappears. So you have to figure out a different way to communicate when you're online. Sort of.
We're speaking with Peggy.
A virtual body language, maybe.
Yeah. We're speaking with Peggy Kendall. She is a professor of communication studies at Bethel University, who is part of this study on remote work and creativity. Peggy, did you find that any industry in particular is particularly good at remote work or particularly bad at remote work?
Well, not really. I mean, we talk to people in a lot of different kinds of industries. I mean, we talk to, like IT, marketing, social media, those kinds of people. But we also talked to people that did a lot of customer service things. A lawyer we talked to who was really interesting. So I don't know. There's different kinds of jobs in a lot of different kinds of organizations. So I think it kind of depends on the type of job. And I think it depends on the kind of person, too. I mean, I know personally I have a hard time doing a ton of online work. So I think it's kind of a combination of both.
What was so interesting about the lawyer that you just mentioned? You said he was very interesting. What made him interesting?
Oh, that's a good question. He had really thought about it. So before he went remote, he really took the time to kind of figure out what's going to work, what's not going to work. He has these regular check-ins with the people who work for him, which I think is super important. So I don't know. He seemed to really be on top of the whole virtual process, I'd say.
So he was doing it well.
He was doing it really well. Yeah.
Okay.
And the ones, did you find a commonality of the companies or people or employees that were thriving with virtual learning, or with virtual work? Then is there a commonality? Is something that you could pinpoint saying this might work for everybody?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that successful companies do is they check in often. They don't just assume their employees are doing okay. Like, well, nobody said anything in the meeting, so I guess it's okay. They would have these check-ins, and they'd actually talk to the people, even if it's like 10, 15 minutes a couple of times a week. It's like, how you doing? What do you need from me? What questions do you have? Then people don't have to assume all these things like, my boss hates me, or, I'm not doing a good job, or I'm going to lose my job, or whatever. So those check-ins seem to be really key.
All right. It's a good thing we check in a lot, you guys, but we still go in. So did you find out, Peggy, is there a perfect mix right now for the American workforce? Like, what advice would you give the American workforce that's struggling with remote work or forcing back to the office? What's the takeaway here?
Talk to all of America's workers and give some advice.
I would like to talk to all of American workers right now. I think two things for managers. You have to check in, and you have to watch your nonverbals, because employees don't have all the information, and so they just make all these assumptions. And you have no idea sometimes what you're communicating nonverbally if you're not paying attention to it. So one of the biggest things that we found was that the big killer of psychological safety was this idea that my boss is too busy. And probably even more, my boss is too busy for me. And so we asked, well, why did you think that? And they came up with things like being distracted in a Zoom meeting, whoever does that, or being distracted, or ending a meeting quickly, or canceling meetings, or responding to a message in like these short, cryptic little sentences, and you can't figure out what on earth they meant. Or I think one of the biggest things, I was just working with the company last week, and people ghost each other. It's like, I need you to respond, and nobody responds to each other, and it's so all it would take would be just a little, I got your email, thanks for your email. I'm swamped today, but I'm going to try and get this tomorrow. Just something little like that can make such a difference in how people perceive you.
Absolutely.
It's a good tip.
Peggy, thank you so much. I know you worked with a graduate student on this too, Tristan Thomas. I thought that was a very cool aspect of the story. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
There she goes.
All right, we got to talk to each other more. I think that's a really good takeaway. I think anybody who's listening, we've all been there because we're sitting at our desks and we're like, you're not in person. And you're like, oh, I don't want to respond to that now. I don't. But even just I see your email and I promise I'll get back to you. I'm just swamped today is the way to go. It's the constant communication.
And it doesn't take that much effort.
It doesn't. That's a good takeaway.
So